Tonight on Primetime Politics, Trump's vision for Canada and the world. The U.S. president expands on his America First policy, laying out a global game plan for U.S. national security. Coming up, we'll speak with former UN Ambassador Bob Rae and find out why he thinks Canada needs to push back. Also,
most people in this country supports every part of that MOU.
Most, but not all, will speak to two environmental leaders who resigned from the government's Climate Advisory Board, upset with that MOU and what it says about government priorities. Plus,
these were not gifts. These were taken from our people.
A return of Indigenous artifacts and how it might further reconciliation with the Catholic Church. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Well, the subject of Canada-U.S. trade came up last night during a taping of the Kennedy Center Honors. The U.S. president asked whether he would restart trade talks with Canada anytime soon. And here is what we heard from Donald Trump.
I have a great relationship with Canada. They're very tough traders, but I have a very good relationship with the Prime Minister and with Canada.
And you had said you would halt those negotiations earlier after the tariff.
Well, I have halted them.
And so will you restart them?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, you know, the problem is Canada makes a lot of things that we don't need because we make them also. But we'll work it out. Look, Canada's a special place, and they really are good at ice hockey, aren't they?
So confident that trade between the two countries will eventually get worked out. But will those yet to be determined talks result in a deal that Canada will be happy about? That has been in question for months now, and those questions have only grown louder thanks to a national security strategy that was released by the White House late last week. A world according to Trump document that says the United States must be preeminent in the Western Hemisphere, a country that other countries should see as their partner of choice, and to ensure that, the U.S. would discourage collaborations with anyone else. Well, Bob Rae wrote a Substack in reply to the new policy in which he says Canada and other countries need to push back on the Trump vision. Well, joining us now is Bob Rae, until recently Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, joining us today as a private citizen. Mr. Rae, thank you for the time.
Thank you, Michael. Good to join you.
Listen, Mr. Trump, in this recently released national security strategy, he does make a departure from generations of post-World War II U.S. leaders, more concerned about economic outcomes than principles like democracy. How problematic is that?
I think it's very problematic, but I also think it's not exactly new in the sense that we've been living with this since January 6th, and we've been living with the consequences of it as it relates, obviously, with our trade relationship. But certainly, in multilateral places like the UN and NATO, we've all noticed a dramatic shift in the American position. This really lays out the ideological foundations of this position and the ways in which it will be carried out in different parts of the world. And it poses enormous challenges for us, but it poses enormous challenges for Ukraine, for Taiwan, for many different parts of the world where it's clear that the American position substantively and rhetorically has changed a great deal.
Changed a great deal, and as you say, that will have a profound impact on countries like Canada. And there is one part of the strategy that reads as follows. It says, we want other nations to see us as their partner of first choice, and we will, through various means, discourage their collaboration with others. How concerning should that line be for Canadian decision makers when this country is thinking, of strengthening military ties with Europe, perhaps purchasing the Gripen from Sweden, submarines from Germany or South Korea, and yet here clearly is a line that says they will discourage collaboration with others?
Well, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, it's from one point of view, they're saying, we're pretty much abandoning you, but at the same time, we're going to stop you from having relations with anybody else. I mean, it does make life, I mean, there are inconsistencies in the document. There's rhetoric, which, you say, well, that's just rhetoric, but you also have to understand that there's an attitude, there's a mindset that's reflected in the document that's very troubling, because it's really a way of saying we don't want to take we don't want to look out for you any longer the way that we used to. We don't want to have the same kind of strong relationships that are based on friendship and long-term partnerships that we've had over many decades. We're going to forget about all that. We're only going to be interested in what's in our self-interest, what advances our interests as opposed to anyone else's. Oh, by the way, including yours. But we don't want you to have very good relations with anybody else, because we're the best partners you could possibly have. I mean, there is a problem with that mindset. I think anybody who analyzes the document will say, if you're not a member of the Trump support team, you got a problem. And that's something I think as an independent, sovereign country, which Canada is and will continue to be, any self-respecting Canadian government has to make very clear what we think is reasonable and what we think goes beyond what's reasonable. And it does make all of our lives more complicated, but that's not what, for Donald Trump, that's not the issue. This is about the interests that he has and his family and others have about how they advance their own self-interest in the world, and the rest of us had better just go along with it, or else there's going to be trouble, which is not a particularly pleasant way to think about how our future could unfold.
Mm-hmm. But how much of a pushback can this country make? Given the geographic proximity of Canada with the United States, the difference in size of our two countries and economies, the fact that Canada will always have to trade with the United States because we are neighbors, how much choice do we really have, or leeway do we have to kind of counter this idea of Canada, I guess, as a vassal state to the United States?
Well, I don't think the vassal state option is a real option for Canada. It's never been how we have seen ourselves, and frankly, how Americans have seen us. And I think I don't particularly want to throw fuel on this particular rhetorical fire, but I do think the reason that I put out my Substack was to say, wake up, Canadians. We need to understand what we're dealing with here and the kind of excesses that this rhetoric can give rise to. I mean, my firm view is that what America is saying is not actually in America's best interests, and that if you want to put anything first, you have to put others up there as well. You can't just be for yourself, you have to be for others as well. We were taught this as sort of basic rules of moral behavior in kindergarten. So it's important for us to keep on insisting that the pure pursuit of self-interest at the expense of everyone else, where every transaction redounds only to the benefit of the most powerful, is not a sensible way to proceed, because it ignores the self-interest of everyone else and the fact that others are going to have interests as well that have to be reconciled. That's what diplomacy is. That's what serious politics is. And so there is a quality to this document where you really have to say, well, yeah, but let's get real here about how this is going to get done.
Bob Rae, always appreciate the time. Thank you for this evening.
Thank you, Michael. Good to talk to you. Take care.
You too. Well, here in Ottawa, the Polyev Conservatives will try to force the government to commit to a new pipeline tomorrow. Using an opposition motion, it will try to force the government to commit itself to a new pipeline and the lifting of a tanker ban off the coast of northern British Columbia. Now, Conservatives say this bill will eliminate the ambiguity they accuse the government of perpetuating. Take a listen to what was said in question period today.
The Prime Minister is hiding under his desk. Liberal members on one side of the country are saying they're against, while they're pretending in Alberta that they are in favour. So why don't they stand up in the House of Commons, look Canadians in the eye, take one position, vote for a pipe to the Pacific, and override the tanker...
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and all of us and all Conservative premiers and most people in this country supports every part of that MOU, Mr. Speaker.
So we'll see how that vote goes tomorrow. But despite what Minister McKinnon says, not everyone supports the MOU universally. Chief among them, 2 environmental experts who quit the government's Climate Advisory Board over the agreement itself. Well, to tell us more about the reasons for leaving the advisory body, we're now joined by climate advocate and policy leader Catherine Abreu, who is also director of the International Climate Politics Hub, among other positions, and in Vancouver by climate scientist Simon Donner, who also heads up the Institute for Resources, Environment and Sustainability at the University of British Columbia. Hello to both of you.
Hi, Michael.
So you both have now left this. Hi there. So you've both left the advisory body now, and it seems to be that the MOU that was signed between Ottawa and Alberta essentially was the straw that broke the camel's back. Is that fair to say, Catherine?
I think that's fair to say, but it's also important to emphasize that that MOU is just the latest in a series of very serious changes that have been made to Canada's approach to climate change, starting, of course, with Bill C-5, where we saw extraordinary powers being given to the cabinet to make decisions on major projects, including decisions that might contravene Indigenous rights and title. We saw what was in the budget of this climate competitiveness strategy, and I use air quotes there because really all that did for climate was roll back existing climate policies without replacing them with anything. And then finally, we have this MOU that promises to build new fossil fuel infrastructure, which will grow the largest source of emissions already in the country without any limits on those emissions, and all of that using taxpayer dollars. And given all of this and the fact that I really felt the law that Canada's net zero advisory body is enshrined in was not being respected by these decisions, and we were not being consulted, I could no longer be a member of the net zero advisory body.
Simon, how much does that echo what you've been feeling?
It's very similar. You know, I've been in the position of being the chair of the advisory body for, I had been the chair for about 6 months. I was the sole chair. They had not appointed a second chair, which they're supposed to do. They had not filled, the government had made no effort to fill the empty slots on the advisory body. So we were really sort of leaking oil, so to speak. And it was just not, it was really hard to keep up our work. We had no mandate from the government. And, I wasn't necessarily seeing this as malice from the government, but at some point, the lack of attention means a lack of respect for it, respect for the importance of independent advice. The systems like having, an international climate council set by legislation works really well in other countries. And Canada's had, sort of started to betray that.
Are you leaving too soon, though? Like, for example, Catherine, when you talk about Bill 5, the Prime Minister says, Indigenous consultation is not over. It's now part of the process. It's going to be something that they respect going forward. And similarly, when it comes to this MOU, it's a process. There's no real pipeline yet. Are you leaving too early before being able to give advice or direction to essentially when the rubber hits the road?
Both Simon and I are founding members of the Net Zero Advisory Body. We have been involved in building this thing from the ground up. So that's been 5 years of our dedication to this committee. And so I don't think that anyone could question our level of commitment and how difficult it was to make this decision. We've been hearing a lot of wait and see, wait and see how this is going to turn out. We're going to set these climate policies aside. We're going to dismantle these climate policies and eliminate the associated cuts to climate pollution that they were finally starting to make. But don't worry, we're going to do something about that later on. And I just don't have the confidence to be able to wait and, trust that something meaningful is going to come down the line, particularly not when, as Simon pointed out, the expert body that has been appointed to give advice on future plans related to climate change has been asked no questions about those future plans. So having no visibility and just being told to trust that everything would be fine just did not give me the confidence that I needed to be able to continue and to be able to, put my name on what is a collective endeavor from the federal government, or what should be a collective endeavor from the federal government to address this serious crisis.
Okay, so you couldn't put your confidence in it. How about you, Simon? Are you concerned that you're leaving the process too early?
I hated doing this. I didn't want to leave. I did not want to leave the advisory body, but this is not my fault. I'll be frank about this. This is the government's fault. Everybody involved, including people in government, agree with that it is their failure to pay attention to the advice that's being given to them and to respect a process that works, that there's value. Countries do this. They have outside experts provide advice, and it doesn't mean you have to follow the advice, but you should at least consider it. You should at least consult the experts and everything. And what we're seeing here is not just a set of bad policy decisions, but a set of bad processes. And that's what really disturbed me. That, listen, I'm a scientist in my day job, been a scientist for a very long time. The key to science is the methods. How do you come to the conclusions that you reached? And the MOU, it was the last straw for me because it's a deeply cynical document. It's not about climate change. It rolls back climate policies. And it makes a whole bunch of promises that are, puts things on the table that are anathema to addressing climate change. And so
for example,
I couldn't look myself in the mirror. Well, the first example, and the easiest example, is allowing to expand the tax credits for carbon capture and storage to enhanced oil recovery. That is contrary to the purpose of the tax credits. And so even listing it as a possibility for negotiation is ridiculous. I mean, the federal government has to have some standards here. Otherwise, this isn't about climate change at all. And, my staying in this, if I'd stayed in this role, it's just like challenging my own integrity. I just couldn't look myself in the mirror and continue to do this for the government. And I had been warning them this for months. So it shouldn't come as a secret to them.
I think many Canadians are in approval or supportive of, based on the polls, of a potential pipeline here because Canada is facing dire economic outcomes. Is that not part of the consideration? Is this too, and forgive the term, too ideological given the reality that Canada currently faces, Catherine?
It's hard for me to keep a straight face when I hear those kinds of arguments because I've been working on climate change for close to 20 years in Canada since I was in high school, and I've been hearing for the last 20 years that any time Canada needs some kind of economic project, all it can be is an oil and gas pipeline. We tried that. A number of years ago. Let's remind ourselves that Canada already bought an oil and gas pipeline, which was supposed to somehow solve all of our economic problems. But instead, it is costing billions, literally billions of dollars in taxpayer dollars every year. And it's not given us that economic boom that we always are promised with a simple oil and gas pipeline. I think these pipelines are about satisfying the desires of the fossil fuel industry. It's not about the rest of Canada. What would be about the rest of Canada is, taking the advice given by experts across the country, including the Net Zero Advisory Body, to modernize the Canadian economy by investing in clean energy and clean technology, which is a booming global economic sector that Canada has been losing market share in for years. And recently, the OECD actually pointed out that Canada's failure to invest in that green economy is a main reason for our economic stagnation. So I'm just tired of the pipeline argument. I don't buy it anymore.
Simon, last word to you. We have about a minute left.
This idea that Canadians are in favor of pipelines, the misunderstanding, if you dig into the poll data, the reason they're in favor of pipelines because they think and they've been convinced by people in power that you can do that while reducing emissions. And it's just not true. And if you unpack those two things, the support for the pipelines declines sharply. And so I think, again, it's a big misunderstanding of what Canada really needs.
Well, listen, I appreciate the fact that the two of you made a very tough decision here and have taken the time to talk to us about it this evening. Thank you very much to both of you. Catherine Abreu, Simon Donner, thank you again.
Thanks for having us.
Well, a historic repatriation took place in Montreal this weekend. 62 Indigenous artifacts making their way back to Canada, returned by the Vatican after sitting in a museum for about 100 years. Now, the return was facilitated in part by the late Pope Francis, who had come to Canada in 2022 to apologize for the Catholic Church's role in the abuse and the generational trauma inflicted on Indigenous people through residential schools. This return of artifacts seen as one step in the Church's path towards reconciliation.
62 items. I don't know how they chose that because I was at the Vatican 2 weeks ago and there's still First Nations items at the Vatican. And so again, we call upon the Vatican to return the remaining, anything that they have that belongs to First Nations.
For now, we are very pleased that the Museum of History has an open door for those items to be stored safely and with respect. But we know that ultimately our goal is to return those items to where they belong.
And while the Vatican only identified one Michif Métis Abduosan item, we know that there's a journey, a respectful journey, of more examination, more partnership, more involvement. And we commit again to be respectful partners alongside Inuit Taprit Kanatami and the Assembly of First Nations.
Cassidy Caron is a past president of the Métis National Council. She also played an important role in getting these artifacts returned to Canada and in time to their respective communities. Cassidy, good to see you again. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
So you are credited for pressing the late Pope Francis to have these items returned. Can you tell us a bit about how that happened? Because you did lead this mission of Métis residential school survivors to the Vatican. But how did you learn about these items that were being held by the Vatican?
Sure. I wouldn't say I'm credited for doing this. There's a lot of credit that has to go to Métis and First Nations and Inuit survivors of residential schools who have been advocating, well, first for the apology from Pope Francis, and then alongside actions that would follow that apology. And one of those being the return of items that were held in any Vatican institutions. For me, I learned that there were Métis-specific items that were held in these institutions when I was doing consultations with community members prior to the delegation that I led in 2022 to the Vatican. Community members brought it to my attention and told me that it must be on our list at the Métis National Council to advocate for the return, the repatriation of these ancestral objects. And so that's what we did in 2022, and then had the opportunity to actually visit the Anima Mundi Museum in 2022 while we were in Rome and the Vatican. A select few items were presented to us at that time. So I was able to see with my own eyes that, of course, there were First Nations, Métis, and Inuit items held at the Anima Mundi Museum.
A select few, as you say, and we're going to get to that in a bit when in relation to the 62 that have now made their way back to Canada. But the Vatican has been hesitant to return artifacts to their communities of origin in the past. What changed in this case, do you think?
This was the result of the relationship building and the immense amount of time that Pope Francis actually spent listening to the stories of residential school survivors here in Canada and the delegations that traveled to the Vatican in 2022. I believe it was largely due to that relationship building and the stories that they shared with Pope Francis. Him as a human being really heard what has taken place in Canada's history and the role of the Catholic Church, and he was compelled to do something. So this was an initiative that he began prior to his passing, and Pope Leo carried it forward, knowing that this was something that was important to Pope Francis.
How does the return of these artifacts further reconciliation? Because that has been noted, but for people that don't necessarily make the connection, how does it actually do that?
So these ancestral objects are more than just objects. They hold our stories. They hold significance to our communities in ways that are so important that they can't just be held, overseas. For our future generations to be able to access and see and feel these items and know the stories behind them while they are back here on our homelands is so incredibly important. It's something that needs to continue. This is just the beginning of these repatriation efforts, and it's a start, but it is extremely important and a good step forward in reconciliation.
Okay, let me pick up on that point then, because you talked about how you were allowed to see a select few items when you were actually at the Vatican, but here we have 62 artifacts now back on Canadian soil. Again, they'll be repatriated to their communities in time as things are sorted through, but there are apparently more at the Vatican. So what's next?
So for the Métis National Council, President Pruden will be continuing efforts to build relationships with the Anima Mundi Museum, with officials within the Vatican, with Pope Leo himself, to be able to do more. We know that there are more Métis-specific items held within the museum. There has to be a significant amount of work to educate museum officials about the history of these items, the history of the Métis Nation, and really do the work to catalog the items. We don't know specifically how many items are held over there. So there's a lot of work left to do. So I know President Pruden at the Métis National Council will be continuing efforts to do just that.
Mm-hmm. Now, the efforts did begin with the late Pope Francis, and since his passing, it is now Pope Leo. As you said, Pope Leo picked up where Pope Francis left off. But do you think that that will mean beyond these 62 artifacts as well?
I certainly hope so. I know, again, President Pruden was able to go to the Pope Leo's inaugural Mass and have the opportunity to continue those relationship building efforts. We know that Pope Francis also, when he apologized, he tasked the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops to carry forward the work and the actions that are remaining on the journey of reconciliation. And so in partnership with the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops and the relations that we still have over at the Vatican with specific cardinals and different officials, we're hopeful that this work can continue.
Cassidy Caron, as I said off camera, I always appreciate the time that I get to speak with you. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Michael. Great to see you.
And that is Primetime Politics. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.